Heinrich Himmler, one of the main architects of the Nazi Holocaust. Born the middle-class son of a schoolteacher, he became one of the most infamous figures in modern history. He was the driving force behind Germany's attempt to breed a master race and ordered the genocide of millions.
When she was arrested, she was 3 years old, and she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. One of the things I find most frightening about Himmler is if you look at his very early life, here's a guy who grows up in a well-to-do, middle-class family. There doesn't seem to be anything in his early childhood that sort of sets him up to be this sort of architect of terror during the Nazi regime.
I think you can look at his relationship with his father. It was one marked by distance, by a lack of warmth, by disappointment that might have affected his susceptibility to radicalization.
I think that he's tremendously insecure in some ways. You know, as he develops into a young man, he is not fully formed. So I think this sort of radical groups that you see him join is what's going to give him the kind of center that he so desperately craves.
Yeah, well, it does seem that Himmler must have been searching for himself. Somebody who is trying to find his way is ripe to be taken in by these types of radicalization movements, and it was certainly ripe at the time.
I still think there's a big leap between coming into an environment with radicalized politics and then ending up as one of the key players in the Nazi system of terror, repression, and mass murder. So, exactly how did he make that leap? The answer lies in the original seat of Nazi power in Germany, Munich. And that's where I've come to. What I'm trying to understand is how Heinrich Himmler, how he became so radicalized.
Well, it all happened in Munich.
I've met up with freelance journalist Michael Tramer, who covers the activities of the far right in Germany today and knows its history well. It was here in Munich that the young Heinrich Himmler began his descent into darkness. Himmler was only 19 and the son of a schoolteacher. He had been too young to fight in the First World War, but found himself in the heat of the action in the aftermath of the German defeat. Wow, cool-looking building. Michael takes me to a place that was vital to the political development of a young Himmler. A beer hall.
Beer halls were very popular, crowded places, loud, predominantly men enjoying beer, enjoying the night, and also listening to political talks and slowly radicalizing themselves.
So this was really a place that people met to hear about politics, to discuss politics, but also they'd come into contact with major far-right leaders such as Hitler.
Most definitely.
In 1921, Hitler was leading the fledgling Nazi party. Across Munich's beer halls, he railed against the Jews and the communists, and found an audience among students and the unemployed. Among them was Heinrich Himmler.
In a time of crisis after World War I, it became quite common to blame Jews for all the hardship that had befallen Germany. And anti-Semites blamed Jews as being loyal only to each other and to their international interests. So the idea spread that Jews in high finance had betrayed Germany for their own ends.
We often find that individuals who feel disenfranchised from society are often searching for themselves, searching for meaning, and having a difficult time doing so. They find a scapegoat group to be able to blame for their problems. It's easier than to search inwards.
So how did Heinrich Himmler get involved with the Nazi movement?
He was a really talented dancer, actually, and participated in group dances, and those were also held in beer halls.
He became a Nazi through dancing.
That's how he made contact with fascists.
A dancing Himmler is a strange image to conjure, especially when you consider that many of the men around him were veterans of World War I. militarism was a big part of German culture at that time, I believe.
You're right. Militarism was really important. It pretty much painted a picture of the ideal man back then. Himmler had a fascination for military from very early on.
A defining moment in Himmler's youth was the fact that he was too young to enlist in World War I. His brother served, and Himmler resented that he didn't have the opportunity to prove his worth and serve as well.
Eager to rub shoulders with real war heroes, Himmler signs up for the Nazi Party in 1923. Just a few months later, he takes part in Hitler's attempt to overthrow Bavaria's democratic government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch.
Himmler is nothing if not ruthlessly ambitious, and he knows that if he's going to rise within the Nazi Party, he needs to, attach himself to the coattails of one man. That's Adolf Hitler.
And where was Himmler at the time of the coup?
He was actually right here in the Lebensborn keller.
Right here?
Well, maybe not on this exact spot, but in this
this
hall.
actual beer hall?
Yes.
Wow. It was in this beer hall, nearly 100 years ago, that Himmler joins the front line of a dangerous new political movement. So during the 1923 beer hall putsch, it must have been filled with hundreds of people, many of them heavily armed, all waiting for the orders to go and take their objective in the city. And for Himmler, that was a huge moment because this was his first significant involvement with the Nazi Party.
Yes, this was the moment for Himmler to prove that he's a soldier, that he's fighting for the cause. He is finally able to display his manhood.
This is Himmler's moment. He's marching through the streets, ready to take Munich and plow on to Berlin. But the Nazis are stopped in their tracks, and the coup ends in defeat at the foot of the city's iconic military monument, the Feldenhalle. There, during a confrontation with Munich police, 14 Nazi demonstrators were killed and dozens arrested, including Hitler himself. This was a significant moment in the rise of the Nazi Party. One that continues to resonate with far-right supporters, even today. Michael has brought me to this nearby square, where tonight a group of anti-immigration protesters are laying out their extreme agenda.
We have here people in Germany, they are not allowed to be here. You have to go back to your home countries, and if they don't do this, you have to do it with another way.
What do you mean by other way?
Civil war.
Civil war. So you mean you would kind of start a civil war yourselves to force emigrate?
Yes. Islam is not compatible with the German society.
For us to be in the 21st century and these people to say that now it's looking at a time of violence, that to me is extremely disturbing and very frightening. And if we don't remember our history, we don't remember the lessons of the past, it could be a catastrophic moment for us. The parallels between what I've just heard and what happened here over 70 years ago are unmistakable. What was so frightening is he was talking about violence and a coming civil war in Europe.
He has made really clear in statements saying over the microphone, I just in general don't like Muslims. I can't help myself, but I don't like them. This hatred on a certain group for sure fueled the rise of the Nazis back then. Nowadays, they're aiming for a different target, but nevertheless, they are having radical thoughts on a certain group of people. They're openly racist.
So how do you feel about all this?
I find it really disturbing and frightening that a movement like this finds followers and gathers in the downtown of a city like Munich.
Yet this is just as it was in the time of Himmler, when his fascist leanings compelled him to join Hitler's attempted coup. The next day, Michael and I head to the Feldenhalle, where that attempt fell apart. So this is the location where the beer hall putsch was crushed.
Yes.
So this place was a very important site for the Nazis. So how was this area treated when they were in power?
During the time they were in power, every year they would hold a big rally here and people would have to Hitler salute when they were walk by.
So this was essentially transformed into a shrine.
Yes, this was transformed into a shrine, a really important place for the Nazis back then, and it is up to nowadays.
So what do you mean it's still a shrine?
Well, during a far-right rally down the road, a group of 10 split off the rally, walked over this place, marched up the steps, stood there, chanted "Hasta la vista, antifascista," and did an almost Hitler salute.
Today, the infamous salute is a criminal offense in Germany and many other European countries. It's shocking to learn that a similar gesture is still being used in a public place. So you're telling me that 2 years ago, a bunch of guys went up the steps here and almost did a Hitler salute.
Well, yeah, I can show you the video. I filmed that on that day.
You took a video of it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's see that. That's unbelievable.
You can see the video here. The group was standing up there in front of the statue, chanting, and here you see the guy doing the Hitler salute.
Yeah, I see him there. On my quest to figure out where Heinrich Himmler fits into Hitler's inner circle, I've been sidetracked by the fact that neo-Nazis are still gathering in Munich 70 years after the war ended.
Yes, my goodness.
It's an unsettling reminder of how young people can be seduced by far-right ideology, just like Himmler was back in 1923. That must have been bone-chilling to experience that.
Yeah, it was a pretty devastating moment. Munich police was criticized for not stopping the people who go up there, because usually, or it is in general illegal to demonstrate up on that plane.
I imagine if you were traveling to Munich and you didn't know its history, you would never make that connection, because this is a 19th century looking building. It doesn't scream out to me as being something that would be used as a far-right or former Nazi shrine.
No, you're right. Most people here probably don't know that much about the historic meaning.
After the Nazis' attempted coup was stopped here at the Feldenhalle, Adolf Hitler was sent to prison. But Himmler emerged unscathed and hungry for more.
When it came time to charge people for involvement in this attempted coup, they found that there wasn't enough evidence against Himmler to actually charge him. This became an opportunity for Himmler, because as some of the Nazi elite were in prison, Himmler was able to take on an organizing role and a role of spreading and disseminating information.
In 1927, Himmler becomes party leader in Lower Bavaria. Soon after, he is appointed as head of the Nazis' elite bodyguard unit, known as the SS. He quickly expands the force to gain more power within the party. He gives speeches about Jewish conspiracies and helps to popularize the idea of Aryan supremacy, a master race dominated by blonde, blue-eyed Germans.
So in this context of this racial theorizing, people start thinking of Jews not so much as a different religious group, but as a different people, as fundamentally alien and other.
For the next leg of my journey, I'm heading to the town of Steinhöring, east of Munich, to meet a woman who understands better than anyone how Himmler's beliefs about racial purity were taken to the extreme.
Wow, this must be the original gate to this place. Look at that. The SS emblem. Really creepy.
This is the site of a terrifying secret program created by Himmler himself, known as Lebensborn.
I'm James. Very nice to meet you.
Gisela Heidenreich was a product of this program. What happened to her was so traumatizing that she is now a family therapist.
This was the first Lebensborn home. The institution was founded by Himmler in '35, and then he built the first and the biggest home here.
It's a legacy she has been forced to live with her entire life.
The Lebensborn program was actually Nazism and racial theory put into practice. It was essentially a breeding program for members of the SS to impregnate someone who was statuesque, blonde, looked very much the kind of wholesome woman that Nazis so liked. The idea was to breed as many perfect Aryan specimens as you could. Why? Because it was felt that that type of human being was better than a human being from another racial group. It was as simple as that. It was pure racism.
Heinrich Himmler took a special interest in the program. He ensured the mothers were screened for their racial suitability. It's even believed he considered himself the godfather of any child born on his birthday. And he ordered all SS officers to procreate for the nation, with a minimum of 4 children each.
And if you didn't have 4 children?
He could have illegitimate children out of the marriage.
Right.
Because he said, we can't spoil this precious German blood.
So the Nazis were selecting people to come here based on racial
Yeah,
characteristics.
exactly. But definitely it was the other side of Holocaust.
And there's a dark reality to Gisela's intimate knowledge of these events.
My mother was a tall blonde woman and my father was a tall blonde SS officer.
On my mission to determine where Heinrich Himmler ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I'm meeting with Gisela Heidenreich to learn more about his racist breeding program called Lebensborn.
So what was it like for you finding out that your father was an officer in the SS?
It was horrible. I don't want to be produced by a man who killed others. I felt suicidal.
Really?
Really.
Gisela was born after her mother had an affair with a married SS officer. Himmler encouraged all his officers to do this, to produce as many Aryan offspring as possible. He set up Lebensborn homes to house SS babies all across Nazi-held Europe. Some 8,000 illegitimate children were born in Germany and another 12,000 in Norway. But after the war, those children had to grow up with the stigma of their birth.
The teacher in front of the whole class asked me, there's something wrong in your file. There is no name of your father. What's the name of your father? I said, I don't know. And the whole class was roaring of laughter. So this was the first time I realized that something was really wrong with me.
So what's it like to see this place?
It's shame and fear and how could they do this? How could they try to produce special people who should in the future represent Germany?
Yeah.
And this makes me sad and feeling guilty because I really feel I'm part of this whole system.
Aryan breeding may have been the program's primary focus, but Himmler took it even further.
The Lebensborn program wasn't just there for SS men to impregnate ideal Germanic women. It was also in the business of child kidnap. So when the Nazis took over various territories, you would have SS employees who would look around these villages and towns in places like Poland and the Ukraine and look, oh, there's a blonde child, a proper Aryan. So we'll just take him from his parents, take him back to Germany, give him a German name, make him fostered by a nice German family, and that's another Aryan to add to the mix. It was an absolutely evil thing to do.
There were more than 200 children here.
More than 200 children here?
Yeah, they put all the children in here who they collected from the other homes. Lebensborn is one of the whole horrible mixture of the criminality of Third Reich, and there was nothing good about it.
One of the hardest things to understand about Nazis is their sense of right and wrong. Many of them truly appeared, at least, to believe that their atrocious behaviors were, in fact, right or justified.
The idea of this place is so absurd. Himmler created the Lebensborn program in an attempt to create this mythical Aryan master race. Yet Himmler himself looked nothing like the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed ideal he and the Nazis were obsessed with.
Gisela has really opened my eyes to the vile way Himmler's racist agenda destroyed so many families. But his Aryan ideology didn't end with racial purification. When Hitler and the Nazis came to power in 1933, Himmler's SS was already a force to be reckoned with. Soon after, Himmler took control of Germany's internal security and policing. Under his leadership, the SS began to crack down on all dissenting voices, including communists, Jews, church leaders, anyone who spoke out against the party. This was all part of a master plan to fundamentally change the social fabric of German society. I'm headed to the forests of Westphalia, 440 kilometers west of Berlin, to learn about Himmler's ultimate goal. And it all played out here at Wewelsburg Castle, the spiritual home of the SS.
What Himmler wants to do with the SS is to build it up into this elite unit, to be the model of northern Nordic Aryan manhood. Tall, blonde, athletic, intelligent, and Himmler really wants a castle. A Camelot, if you like, for my knights. Who are his knights? Members of the SS. And when he sees Wewelsburg, it just ticks all the boxes.
Himmler imagined Wewelsburg as a luxury retreat for SS leaders, where they would immerse themselves in Germanic legends and folklore. Today, the castle is a museum about the horrors the SS committed.
Yeah, maybe we go to the uniform.
Sure, let's do that.
Marcus Moores is the curator.
It's very striking. What was the significance of having a black uniform like this?
The black uniform should show the SS as an elitist part of the Nazi movement.
The SS uniform is one of the most iconic symbols of terror from World War II. It was designed to instill fear and make Himmler's officers feel superior. Himmler once boasted that the sight of an SS outfit was enough to make people fall ill.
The purpose of the SS is to exert violence, and this is, of course, a symbol of this violence.
I know it's just a uniform, but just seeing this thing up close and knowing what it represents, I just can't help but feel disgusted by it.
Rather than destroy this history, Marcus is determined to keep it alive so others don't forget.
Oh, wow.
They often play host to school groups who come here to learn the truth about Nazism.
I feel like I'm in a medieval hall. What is it?
This is called the Obergruppenführersaal, the Supreme Leaders of the SS Hall.
So specifically for the leadership of the SS?
For the leadership, for the highest generals and officers of the SS, right. Yeah.
I noticed there are 12 pillars. What do they represent?
We don't know it exactly. What maybe was in their minds is something like the legend of King Arthur and the 12 knights.
So this is like part of a twisted Arthurian legend, then?
He saw himself as the leader of some kind of successor of a medieval knights order.
The long-term goal of Wewelsburg was ultimately to become a kind of cathedral to Nazism. It was going to be a place where SS men would go to come and worship, if you like, the idea of the SS.
And at the heart of every religion are its symbols.
And what have we got here in the middle?
This ornament here in the middle of the Supreme Leaders Hall is known as the Black Sun.
The Black Sun?
The Black Sun, yeah.
What does this signify?
We don't know.
Do we have any idea?
The people who should stay here, or who should stand here, maybe should feel like standing
in the center of the world?
In the center of the world, in a symbolic way.
So is this symbol used by members of the far right or neo-Nazis today?
You can find it on websites in Australia, you can find it on the uniforms of Ukrainian nationalist militias and the demonstrations of neo-Nazis in Charlottesville.
Yes.
There were flags with exactly this ornament here.
People were flying flags in America with this symbol on it.
Nazi symbols continue to play a huge role in modern-day fascism. And as I wrap up my visit to Wewelsburg, we find evidence the castle may still be a draw for today's extremists.
What's that?
On my visit to Wewelsburg Castle to learn more about Heinrich Himmler's ultimate ambitions for the SS, I am shocked to see some visitors could still be celebrating the Nazis instead of learning from their legacy of terror.
It looks as if someone has deliberately placed a swastika in the ground. Considering the dark past of this building connected to the history of the SS, it is really, really frightening. How does it make you feel?
Well, of course, angry. We're an institution to educate people about what Nazism and the SS really were.
How important is it for you to ensure that this place does not become a Nazi shrine?
Well, that's what we are working for, of course, what Nazism really meant. It's the persecution of people, it's the hurting of people, it's the killing of people. There is no positive way of thinking about Nazism that is possible.
Himmler's use of Lebensborn as a cathedral to Nazism may well be disturbing. But his twisted beliefs took on another, far more horrific form. And that's where I'm going next, to the site of where some of the worst crimes in history were committed.
So I've never actually been to a concentration camp before.
Okay.
This is my first time to one, and I know it's important to be here, but I'll be completely honest, I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, lots of people say the same thing. It's, even now, so many years later, it's still a very haunting place. Yeah, lots of people have a very strong...
Alexander Perman is an archivist working at Dachau's memorial site, 30 kilometers north of Munich.
Needless to say, I can totally empathize.
This expression is very famous, so can you just tell me what it means and why it's here?
As you say, very iconic. Arbeit macht frei, so work will set you free.
Dachau was the first Nazi concentration camp set up by Heinrich Himmler.
The Nazis, actually, in the early days, publicized the opening of the concentration camps.
Really?
They tried to create an illusion. They said, so we're taking the bad people that are responsible for all the unrest in Germany before we took over. Yeah. We're going to put them in these concentration camps, and through hard work, we're going to reform them.
So it was like an elaborate prison system to reform people who were seen as being undesirable to the nation.
Exactly. The reality on the other side is that the work in the camp was actually designed by the Nazis, pure and simple, to break the inmates.
Himmler was the key figure in establishing how they were designed and how they were run.
Himmler creates a whole new unit of the SS, the Death's Head units, that are there to run the concentration camps. This is absolutely a key part of the way Himmler builds power. He's in charge, he puts his placemen in charge of each of the individual camps, and they report to him.
It's very eerie.
Absolutely. This is what was called the Appellplatz, so the roll call square, and this was designed to make the inmates feel very small, very insignificant, and to intimidate them. So this area could actually hold a capacity of 40,000 inmates at one time.
40,000 people right in front of
exactly.
us here.
Exactly.
It must have been absolutely terrifying to be in here.
This is where sadistic SS guards gathered their prisoners for roll call before they began a 12-hour day of forced labor. Anyone who disobeyed was severely punished.
What is this place?
So this was then called the bunker. This was the prison within the concentration camp.
What does that mean?
So that means, for example, that certain inmates that were seen as having broken the rules would have been put here. There were cells then where inmates could be deprived of light, of warm food. There were certain cells that were standing cells. The inmates wouldn't have been able to sit or lay down.
So you had to stand?
Exactly.
Like, how long are we talking time period there?
Between a day and 36 hours.
A day standing up?
Yeah, it would be very hard physically.
It's chilling to think that people were actually placed in these cells. They're treated like animals.
After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the flow of prisoners to Dachau steadily increased, and the camp was expanded.
What is this place?
This is a reconstruction of what the barracks would have looked like.
How many people were living in this barracks?
Later on in the camp, so the period 1944 to 45, each dorm would have 500 inmates. Disease was then rife. The inmates, their only worth was what they could offer the German war industry. So people were literally driven into the ground.
So basically this place was overcrowded, people were starving, and the SS was working them to death.
So many people were dying, the SS decided to build a crematorium facility. That way, the bodies could be disposed of on site.
It's just so barbaric.
Under Himmler's direction, Dachau became the prototype.
Himmler genuinely regards the people in his concentration camps as being less than human, the Untermenschen, the subhumans. And once you start regarding these people as being essentially like animals, you're happy just to use them as tools.
Himmler oversaw the entire camp system, but he had a special interest in Dachau. It's where he ordered prisoners to build a large herb garden called the plantation.
Why did Himmler have a plantation built next to this concentration camp?
He had an interest in herbal remedies. One project they did as part of the human experiments that took place here, over 1,000 inmates were infected with malaria, and then various herbs and spices were used to try and treat malaria.
So wait, they were deliberately infecting inmates here with malaria?
Yeah. There was no moral conundrum involved at all. The fact that people were dying in the course of trying to find alternate remedies for keeping Germans alive, it was a price he was prepared to pay.
A terrible price.
Absolutely.
One of the remarkable things about the Nazis was their ability to compartmentalize, to be able to commit these atrocious acts against given a group of others, and yet somehow go home at night and live with themselves.
Everything we think of as the worst of Nazi atrocities can often be traced to Himmler's initiative. Himmler was responsible for the expansion of the concentration camp system, and he's the one who created the first camps that were designed specifically as centers of extermination.
To give you an example of a death camp in Treblinka, it was open for about 11 months. In those 11 months, almost 1 million people died.
1 million people in 11 months. That's 100,000 a month.
Death camps like Treblinka in Poland reached those figures through the use of specially designed gas chambers, in which people were murdered en masse. For many, concentration camps like Dachau became the last stop on their journey to those chambers.
If there was one person who was responsible for all this, that's Heinrich Himmler. To me, it is so frightening that one person could be that evil, that they could have that sort of a diabolical vision to create places like this and commit atrocities and mass murder on such a huge scale. What's it like for you on an emotional level to deal with this content on a regular basis?
As much of a cliche as it may sound, it's an honor to work here. It's an honor to be able to keep the history and the events alive so that we can then hopefully learn from this.
It's important to understand an estimated 40,000 people were murdered here by the Nazis less than 75 years ago. How could someone create something as evil as this?
This is why Himmler is considered to be the architect of the final solution. He was key to the systematic murder of not just Jews, but all those considered enemies of the state, most of whom were a threat to no one.
Miriam Grunbaum, when she was arrested, she was 3 years old.
3.
And she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942. So, James, what I'm going to show you are 13 Stolpersteine, stumbling blocks.
On my mission to determine where Heinrich Himmler sits in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I've returned to Munich. I'm here to meet journalist Terry Schwartzberg to learn about the world's largest memorial.
Everywhere where the Nazis killed people, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, there are Stolpersteine. And you'll see you don't stumble over them, despite their name. You stumble upon them, and that's what we're about to do.
The Stolperstein project began in 1992. Each bronze plaque remembers a victim who suffered under the Nazis. From the millions murdered in the camps Himmler devised to the thousands more who survived them, as well as those who fled persecution.
So it's commemorating not just people who were murdered, but also people who survived persecution as well as suffering it.
Right. These Stolperstein are for 3 Jewish families. This family, the Rosners here, as you can see, mother, father, 4 children. Look here, over here, if you can. Miriam Grunbaum, when she was arrested, she was 3 years old. 3 years old. And she was murdered in Auschwitz in 1942. I mean, I have children. How can you murder children? How can you murder a 3-year-old?
I can't get my head around that. These people are completely innocent.
Inspired by the Talmudic saying, a person is only forgotten when his or her name is forgotten, the stones evoke the memory of those the Nazis attempted to erase. Once a stone is complete, it's placed in the ground in front of the victim's home. Each one begins with "Here lived."
Stolperstein are not just a project of commemoration, but we're a family. A family comprised of the victims, comprised of their descendants, their families, comprised of the people who donate the stones, the people who research the stones, and the people who come and learn about the Holocaust by stumbling upon, not over them, but stumbling upon these Stolpersteine.
Terry and other volunteers regularly polish the stones so they don't vanish from sight.
So here's your water.
Okay.
Here's your polish. Here's your sponge. Sponges are coming, they're a bit wet.
I'll just scrub it.
Yeah, and scrub it up. And try to keep yourself clean in the process. Oh, it's coming along very nicely.
Good.
Here comes the miracle. Look how beautiful they get.
Incredible. Oh, nice and shiny. They really are very beautiful.
Yes. Made by hand, that's the whole idea.
Really?
Definitely, the artist, he says, it's an art project and not a mass production product, so they really need to be made by hand, stamped by hand, put into the ground.
The project has led to the creation of more than 70,000 Stolpersteine across 24 countries. But that's a drop in the ocean. The aim is to remember every single person persecuted by the Nazis, including survivors.
We have to put about 18 million Stolpersteine in the ground.
18 million?
Yeah, and we've gotten 70,000. It's a job that's going to take us a while, so we'll be busy for generations.
That's amazing. It must be very fulfilling for you to be able to do this as well, to keep the memory of these people alive.
Yes. Well, I think each person should be remembered. Each person's fate twists your guts, twists your innards. It makes you realize that you, me, and everybody else, these people were just normal people living their lives, and one day somebody said, you're going to be killed, you're going to be persecuted, and they lost everything. I think for my children, and for all the children to come, the Stolpersteine are the best guarantee that we will never experience something like the Nazis again, because they remind us how easily it can happen, and that it did happen, and that's why they've never been more important than they are now.
Given the evidence I've seen of today's Nazis in German streets, these stones seem like shining symbols in a darkening world. They're also a fitting conclusion to my journey into understanding Heinrich Himmler's role in the Holocaust. Now it's time for me to finally determine where this diabolical Nazi fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil.
What to me makes Himmler especially chilling is that he knows what he's doing is wrong.
My visit to Germany has helped inform my understanding of the role Heinrich Himmler played in the Nazi regime. Now it's time for us to decide where he should sit in the hierarchy of evil. Using our unique system of playing cards, I want to determine where Himmler ranks in Hitler's most wanted.
So when you look at Himmler's early life, one thing I was struck by was how stable his family is. But suddenly as a young man, he's seeking out radical political movements.
I think he desperately wanted to fight, didn't he? He was just too young to fight in the First World War, and he always had a massive chip on his shoulder about that.
And the desire to try to fit in and the inability to do so, particularly in the context of the society at the time, it makes him ripe for radicalization.
I've seen firsthand how the radicalization of the 1920s mirrors the way it occurs today. For Himmler, his need to be superior runs deeper. He didn't just want to keep Germany for Germans. He wanted to create an Aryan race.
Interestingly, it's a very personal example of the way that purity and ideas of degeneration and contamination loom so large in Nazi society and the Nazi state, from racial purity all the way down to the level of what an individual Nazi should be as a man, what kind of sexual purity he should practice.
But Himmler was no ordinary SS officer. He might not have pulled any triggers, but he was responsible for murder on an industrial scale.
The place that I went to that I think sort of had the biggest impact on me was Dachau, because I was really struck by the brutality of the system that he created and oversaw.
We can't underestimate the role of anti-Semitism, the role of racial theory, and the role of the belief in racial supremacy in Himmler's politics and in his vision.
You're absolutely right. Himmler was fundamentally responsible for it. I mean, I think the short answer is, without him, it wouldn't have happened to the extent that it did happen. Yes, concentration camps as a concept had been invented even before the Nazi period, but it takes this man to absolutely sort of perfect it to its terrible conclusion.
Anthony, what do you think?
Himmler is the figure who sets things in motion, who creates camps, and who pushes for the final solution.
So by the end of the Second World War, Himmler is overseeing the Nazi terror and mass murder apparatus. He's an immensely powerful man. How comfortable was he with all that power?
I think he was like a swan. On the surface, yes, it all looks very comfortable, but below, he's paddling furiously because he knows what he is doing is wrong on a very, very deep level.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, he seems to have this innate capacity to compartmentalize, to recognize right from wrong. And so it's really amazing that he's able to continue doing what he's doing, to continue on with the ideological adherence.
And I think that's what makes Himmler evil. He knows what he's doing is wrong, and that's what makes him more chilling.
The establishment of the camp system, in which so many died, makes him a critical member of Hitler's inner circle. But despite the terrible toll he inflicted, his time as leader of the SS ended abruptly in May 1945. As the Allies marched through Germany, Himmler attempted to go into hiding, but is caught at a checkpoint. Trapped in custody, he swallows a hidden cyanide capsule and dies.
So what I'd like to do now is come to some conclusion as to where Himmler ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Anthony, your thoughts?
What makes Nazi evil unique is genocide, terror, and wars of extermination. Himmler is responsible for all three. He's number 2.
Guy?
I totally agree with you. He has to be number 2. None of this could have happened without him.
Matt?
Yeah, I don't think the psychology speaks to him in this case, but the history, I agree, number 2.
So based on my experience of his story in Germany and the conversation we've had, I have to agree with you guys. For me, he's number 2, therefore, he is the ace of hearts.
Second only to Hitler, Heinrich Himmler was the criminal mastermind behind the Nazi genocide. For the unspeakable horrors he unleashed across Europe, Himmler trumps all his rivals in Hitler's Most Wanted. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's infamous minister of propaganda. The original master of spin, who brainwashed the German people into joining the Nazi cause. His lies paved the way for the Holocaust and ushered in the most devastating war in modern history. His commitment was total.
To murder your 6 children, it requires devotion that becomes evil in itself.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted.
I think the thing about the Goebbels to me that's so ironic that he's this key figure in the regime, but he's this short guy. He's something like 5 feet tall. He has a pronounced limp from clubfoot disability. He does not come across in any way as this ideal Nazi.
That's particularly true in a society and in a political movement that euthanizes people with disabilities.
And he's extremely quick-witted. And he also has a certain amount of charm. And Goebbels, you know, could play that very, very successfully.
He not only demonstrated some narcissistic personality, but also he appeared to suffer from depression. He had significant insecurity, quite dramatic at times.
Yet he holds this incredibly important and powerful position in the Nazi regime.
So how did Joseph Goebbels seduce the German people into Nazism? I've come to Berlin, the center of Goebbels' propaganda machine.
So this is Babelplatz.
Yes.
And that's Humboldt University.
Yes.
I'm in Babelplatz to find out more about a moment that defined Goebbels.
Here we have it.
I've met up with political activist Jörg Braunsdorf.
This monument, I can see there's, what, empty bookshelves in there?
Sie haben keinen Wert mehr ohne die Bücher. Die Bücher sind der Inhalt der Regale.
On the night of May 10th, 1933, less than 3 months after Hitler took power, Nazi supporters torched a mountain of books by Jewish authors right here in this square.
Die Aktion wurde insbesondere organisiert von dem Nationalsozialistischen Hochschulbund. Gegen Mitternacht kam Goebbels und hielt dann noch eine Rede, eine Propagandarede.
Das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende. Der Durchbruch der deutschen Revolution hat auf dem deutschen Weg wieder die Gasse freigemacht.
LKWs mit ca. 25.000 Büchern wurden hier zu dem, damals hieß er noch Opernplatz.
So they burnt 25,000 volumes of books right here?
Circa, yes.
And I understand there was something like 40,000 people gathered in this square.
Diese mitternächtige Stunde, den Ungeist der Vergangenheit, den Flammen anzuvertrauen. Das ist eine starke, große und symbolische Handlung.
The book burnings, these were conceived of as a cleansing and a purification by fire. So it really was a ritual in the service of Nazi ideology.
Goebbels and the Nazis used spectacle and pageantry and iconography to absolutely dazzling effect. The massive swastika banners, the fires, the nighttime marching, it is visually so impressive.
With his incendiary speech, Joseph Goebbels put a government seal of approval on this racist act. He ordered the film of the event to be played in cinemas across the country. His goal was to turn the nation against the Jews.
Propaganda is simply selling a political message and trying to sell it really hard so that people are going to buy it. Now, you know, the harder the thing you're trying to sell, the better the propaganda's got to be. Buy us, the Nazi Party, and we will make the economy better. Buy us, the Nazi Party, and we will get rid of the Jews.
But who was Hitler's Minister of Propaganda? In 1924, Joseph Goebbels was a 27-year-old PhD and failed author, working at dead-end jobs just to get by. Germany's economy was a mess. Like many, Goebbels was looking for inspiration and someone to blame for his problems.
Goebbels was stuck. He was depressed. He didn't see any prospects. And he became entranced with the person of Adolf Hitler. He began reading anti-Semitic tracts. He began buying into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. He began thinking of himself as somebody who was loyal to the idea of the folk or the race. And he saw Adolf Hitler almost as a religious savior.
He wrote, "We need a firm hand in Germany. Throw out the Jews who refuse to become real Germans. Give them a good beating, too." Germany is yearning for an individual, a man, as the earth yearns for rain in the summer.
Goebbels realizes that Hitler is the one. He's going to be the one who's going to solve Germany's problems. He's frankly captivated by Hitler, and as a result, he joins the Nazi Party. You know, he's there pretty near the beginning.
Goebbels was an intellectual and proved to be a skilled speechwriter and powerful public speaker. Hitler quickly recognized him as a valuable ally. In 1926, he sent Goebbels to Berlin to spearhead the Nazi cause there.
Goebbels, you know, is good at stage managing his own appearances. Hitler does the same thing. You know, like all good public speakers, they have an instinctive feel for their audience, but they also have that kind of narcissism that drives that type of figure on. He starts to peddle propaganda. You know, he gets those leaflets printed. He starts mounting an information war. Now, who's Goebbels targeting with his information war? Well, it's the same old enemies. It's the communists and the Jews.
It was the beginning of an unprecedented campaign of hate that would soon engulf Germany and the world. It's history that Jörg Braunsdorf, who owns Berlin's Tucholsky bookstore, fears we may soon be doomed to repeat. Internet propaganda, fueled by far-right groups, is sharply on the rise in Germany. These groups exploit the recent influx of migrants and asylum seekers in order to spread fear and misinformation.
So this is a meeting with people from the local community, and they're here to discuss a forthcoming counter-protest against what they're describing as a neo-Nazi demonstration.
Es ist eine Auftaktveranstaltung und Informationsveranstaltung aufgrund eines angekündigten bundesweiten Aufmarsches von Neonazis am 3. Oktober. Und diese Decken sind das Symbol von ihnen geworden. Und
the upcoming far-right march and others like it has Jörg and his group fearing that Germany is on a dangerous path towards fascism once again.
Plakaten für den 3. Oktober.
They've invited me to observe their countermarch in a few days' time.
Dinge entwickeln wollen. Also wir wollen nicht nur gegen Nazis demonstrieren, sondern wir wollen für eine Zivilgesellschaft demonstrieren. Und die Tatsache, dass in Deutschland der Rechtsradikalismus bis in die Mitte der Gesellschaft mittlerweile angekommen ist, macht das auch notwendig.
In the late 1920s, Joseph Goebbels organized similar marches as part of his campaign to propel Hitler and the Nazi Party into power. At the end of the decade, his efforts get a huge boost from a global crisis.
The stock market crash of 1929 and the resulting worldwide depression created adverse conditions for Germany, and Goebbels exploited those conditions to his own benefit and to the benefit of the Nazi Party. You have a series of elections in which Goebbels is able to engage in electioneering and to see the Nazis increase their share of the vote.
In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. As his Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels moved to control newspapers, radio broadcasts, and film production.
Heute Morgen um 10 Uhr hat der Boykott begonnen. Wird bis die Mitternachtsstunde fortgesetzt.
Goebbels now commanded a national stage, and cultivating anti-Semitism became official government policy. In the spring of that year, Goebbels took to the podium in front of a massive Berlin crowd.
Vollzieht sich mit einer schlagartigen Wucht, aber auch mit einer imponierenden Manneszucht.
Goebbels was committed to removing Jews from the social, cultural, political, and economic life of Germany. And he was committed to spreading propaganda in order to make this happen.
The speech sparked a surge in vandalism to intimidate Jewish business owners and discourage customers. For Goebbels and the Nazis, graffiti was a cheap and easy method of propaganda to spread hate. And it's making a comeback.
We're going to the playground where the first swastika in our neighborhood was painted.
In a children's playground?
Yes.
On my journey to find out where Joseph Goebbels ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I've met up with artist Ibo Amari.
But graffiti, as you can see in Berlin, is all around us.
Yes.
So.
Nazi graffiti is on the rise in Germany, just as it was in the early years of Goebbels' rise to power.
So where are you taking me now?
We're going to the playground where the first swastika in our neighborhood was painted. And as you can see, it's a quite busy playground, a lot of kids, a lot of families. Same here, you can see. Graffiti everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere.
Ibo is on a mission to find Berlin's Nazi graffiti and paint over it. The project started right here in this predominantly immigrant neighborhood.
It was there, actually. You can see the black border, parts of the black outline. Here. Here, here. So it was quite big, as you can see.
Yeah. So when did this happen? When was the swastika placed here?
This was 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Yes.
And had you seen anything like that before in this area?
No, no. Like the last swastika, I personally, it's over 25 years.
25 years?
Yes.
I just can't believe the size of it. You said it's like 1.5 meters by 1 meter, and it's in a children's playground.
Yes.
Like children, and wait, there's kids
Yes.
playing here right now,
Yes.
and there are apartment.
Yes.
Please
So
look
he
over it.
risked to get caught, and he took a lot of risk to spread his hateful message.
According to Ibo, the swastika's sudden reappearance here was no coincidence.
The top 2 leading books that week when this swastika was painted were from a guy called Sarrazin. He tries to connect genetics with your intelligence.
Yep.
And a racist. And the second place was the corrected version of Mein Kampf, the book from Adolf Hitler.
And that's across Germany? Or?
Across Germany, yes.
So the most popular book was essentially a racist book,
Yes.
and the second most popular
from Adolf
is Mein
Hitler.
Kampf.
Yes.
It was the start of a disturbing trend. Since then, Ibo has painted over scores of swastikas and other Nazi symbols.
If you see them and just think there's just one idiot, but out of one idiot, there's 2 and 4 and 8, and all of a sudden they have a party and get voted.
It's an eerie reminder of what happened here in the 1930s. Goebbels' barrage of propaganda over multiple platforms spread the word of fascism across the country. Nazi ideology became inescapable. But there was one medium that obsessed him more than any other. Film.
Propaganda meant the use of images and mass media to spread ideas. And Goebbels was a master of that, and also the nascent medium of film.
Goebbels made hundreds of propaganda films, sometimes personally overseeing their production. I want to find out more about the methods he used, so I've come to a Berlin cinema to screen one with someone who knows the tricks of the trade.
Alexa?
Hi.
I'm James.
Alexa Karolinsky is a documentary filmmaker.
I understand you have an interesting perspective on Nazi propaganda films.
I grew up Jewish in Germany. All my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So in order to understand my own identity and where I was growing up, I was always very interested in basically how this could have happened and how the Nazis were able to win over the hearts and minds of the German people.
So what makes propaganda different to, say, art and documentary?
Art is there to, as an expression of the artist or as a comment on society. And I think that propaganda is there to basically make you feel like you are part of something larger and that you get to partake in like a collective narcissism, for example, in the case of Nazis, or new flare-ups when it comes to nationalist white supremacy.
We're watching a never-released propaganda film, shot in Warsaw's Jewish ghetto. The film features callous Jewish policemen mistreating fellow Jews. Its intent was to portray them as a subhuman infestation of Poland.
So we're seeing here, obviously, violence being meted out against people, but the people who are committing the violence are not Nazis because they've got the Star of David on their arms. This kid here.
It's the same boy getting up twice in different shots.
It's, yeah, the same kid.
I mean, I wonder if this whole thing was staged. Everybody's wearing these gray and dark coats, and he has this like crisp, cream-colored or white trench coat, and he really pops in the crowd. That's some smart styling and art direction.
This is just the kind of visual trickery Joseph Goebbels became a master of. Despite the twisted nature of how he employed these methods, some consider him to be ahead of his time.
The whole idea that any violence that you see in this is being perpetrated not by Nazis, but by Jews. So it's Jewish violence against Jewish people, and building that whole conspiracy that they do it to themselves. And you wonder how staged those actions actually are, like that as an example, whether they're just grabbing someone random or...
Yeah, there probably are grabbing someone random. I don't know.
Although that woman's reaction makes you wonder.
No, that was real.
That was for sure
real.
real.
That was real. I mean, it's real in the sense that there are real people on the street and they're like, run, just run.
Yeah.
Go run.
Today, even a modestly trained eye could spot Goebbels' filming tricks. But back in 1942, this just wasn't the case.
You have to imagine a public that is not used to mass media and perhaps not as sophisticated in separating truth from fiction, in recognizing manipulation of images as we like to think we are.
Fiction and reality are cleverly blurred. In effect, he's producing a 1940s version of what we now call fake news. This is racism at its ugliest and most hateful. To audiences back then, it served to reinforce the stereotypes about Jews that Goebbels had been peddling for years.
So what are some of the stereotypes that we are seeing on screen here?
Jews bargaining, doing business, the collar is like flipped up, two men talking with each other, maybe they're up to no good. Also in the propaganda footage and all this footage, you usually see Jews as kind of like sheepish, like just following and walking and sad and hungry. You rarely see them defending themselves.
Yeah.
So they're depicting them as poor, despicable, dirty people. The consequence of being part of the Jewish world conspiracy is that is how you will end up.
Propaganda is absolutely vital for them in order to be able to sell what they want to do, in order to promote all the objectionable policies that they're going to carry out. Without the propaganda, you know, the Nazi grip on power would have surely been a lot weaker.
Dissecting Goebbels' cinematic technique was a deeply disturbing experience. But now I'm about to see firsthand what happens when people believe far-right propaganda and act on it. It's the day of Jörg Braunsdorf's counter-protest against a planned far-right march through Berlin. It comes on the anniversary of a huge turning point in Germany's history, October the 3rd, Reunification Day. What should be a celebration of German unity has instead become a standoff between two deeply opposed ideals.
Und heute sind die Feierlichkeiten zum Tag der deutschen Einheit. Leider wollen einige Leute, die sich hier bewegen in Berlin, mit denen wir gar nicht zusammen feiern wollen.
We're in a cordoned-off area. There are hundreds of people here. I'm being told there might be up to 1,000 far-right marches going through the city at some point, and they will be confronted by these people here. So we're expecting a far-right march from here any moment. There are hundreds of counter-protesters here behind this barricade and hundreds more on the other side. In this area, there are dozens of cops, some of them in riot gear. It is so tense right now, you can tell that they don't know what to expect, and they're clearly prepared for things to get violent. Oh my goodness, that looks like an armored vehicle. They're definitely preparing for the worst, that's for sure. They're making their presence very clear to the marchers that are on their way. It's very tense. The counter-protesters are behind the barricade. The cops are here, riot gear. There's cops all around this area. Anything could happen right now. Here they come.
I'm in Berlin on a mission to find out where Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil. Right now, a far-right march, fueled by the same kind of hate propaganda Goebbels produced during the Nazi era, is heading straight for me.
So the people from some of these buildings have been throwing stuff down on the marchers, and some sort of a scuffle has broken out.
One marcher is led away with a head injury.
But it's so strange to be in the middle of this, to think this is Berlin 2018.
Thankfully, there were no serious confrontations. The far-right marchers passed, and I looked for counter-protest organizer Jörg Braunsdorf to get his thoughts.
Das Wunderbare war im Grunde genommen der Nachmittag. Es waren bestimmt 3-mal bis 4-mal so viel, wie wir erwartet haben.
So why is it so important that you protest marches like that?
Aber wir wollen auch den parlamentarischen, den Parteien in den Parlamenten, wir wollen den Institutionen, den Organisationen, den Gewerkschaften, eigentlich jedem Menschen auch das Signal dafür geben, dass sie für ihre demokratische Struktur, für ihre Organisation auch selbst verantwortlich sind.
The people who protested against the march have their way of fighting fascism, but others choose to do it differently. Not far away, graffiti artist Ibo Amari is teaching today's young Berliners some visual trickery of his own.
So this workshop is teaching these kids how to transform swastikas into artwork. So we've got one here that's being transformed into, looks like a king or a queen. Here there's a stereo player, windows in a house. So what they're really doing is they're getting young people to understand what these symbols mean and take them and transform them into something completely different. It's a really, really important social project. Why is it so important to get kids doing it?
They are the future, actually. So if they are not taught to not tolerate stuff like this, who else? The old heads, it's more difficult to teach old people.
Absolutely.
So, and they have fun, are inspired, and it's the best combination. Young people getting creative and doing something good against racism.
Yes.
Ibo's classes wrap up with a little fieldwork.
By each stroke, he's reducing hate, actually. So the more he paints, the less hateful the message gets. And when he's done, that you can see what it was before.
Yeah.
You've seen the kids?
Yeah.
What they've done?
Yeah.
So you as an adult should be much easier for you.
I don't know about that.
Then? Yes.
Like that?
Yes. A little closer.
I don't have a clue what I'm doing, but I'm going to try it out anyway.
Ja, der will aber auch keinen riesen Hinkelstein haben. Guck mal. Muss ganz, ganz fest sein.
Siehst du auch bei den großen, die sind nicht... Yeah. So, was it difficult?
No, it was easy.
See? Like, next time when you see a swastika and nobody removes it, just go there, grab 2 cans and make a cat as you did. Kannst du das nachmalen? Vielleicht? Wollen wir es probieren? She just said she can draw better than you.
Oh, I'm sure she can. That's because you've gone to his workshop.
Yeah, das kann auch sein, yeah.
I just love how you do this. Like, you transform something that's so horrible, but you're sending a message. Because, say someone had, whoever put that swastika there originally comes by, then they suddenly like, oh my God, like, what happened to my swastika? It's now a cat? Like, it's a real, like, you're sticking it to those people.
It is an answer, definitely. And
Yeah.
we did not like leave a hateful message like that unanswered.
No.
So it's an answer with love, creativity, and a lot of fun, huh? Macht Spaß.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been such an amazing experience being a part today of this program, whereby they are transforming these horrible, racist images of swastikas and they are changing them into these beautiful pieces of artwork instead. I think it's so empowering, and it sends such an important message to the creators of the swastikas here, that these people are not going to let it stand, and that they are going to transform it into something completely different. I think it's so important, and it's been such a powerful experience for me to be part of this.
If anyone had attempted this 80 years ago, however, they would have been arrested, possibly even killed. In Germany, under Nazi rule, resistance was close to futile. By 1941, the country was fully under Goebbels' propaganda spell. But he was about to use that control to help launch an attack that was nothing short of madness. His method of rallying support for that campaign relied on one of the oldest tricks in the book.
He built fear. We can never win that war without crushing Soviet Union.
My mission to find out where Joseph Goebbels ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil brings me to a war memorial in Berlin's Treptower Park, built to honor Soviet soldiers who died in the Battle of Berlin.
The Hollywood perception of the Second World War, I feel, is this focus on the American aspect, that America's role in defeating Nazi Germany, accompanied by its Western allies, Britain and Canada. But people forget the brunt of the fighting was carried out by the Soviet Union, and they lost millions of their citizens in the process. And they were the ones that finally conquered the Nazi capital, Berlin.
Now that is one hell of a statue. It's huge.
Made to be seen.
Historian Sebastian Gerhardt is an expert on Germany's war against the Soviets.
I can't get over the scale of this place. So what exactly is it?
It is a Soviet war memorial prepared shortly already after Second World War, but it came at a high price.
Das Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda. Reichsminister Dr. Goebbels verließ die Proklamation des Führers.
On June 22nd, 1941, Goebbels took to the airwaves to announce that Hitler had just launched an invasion of the vast Soviet Union, the hated communist enemy that Goebbels had been campaigning against since his first days in the Nazi Party. But the country was massive in both size and population, and this made him uneasy.
The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 represents a real challenge to Goebbels because he doesn't really agree with it. He has his doubts to drive all those tanks and aeroplanes, eastwards into Russia. But Goebbels is nothing if not loyal to Hitler and adaptable. And, he will use every propaganda tool in his basket to try and get the sell through to the German people.
Von Beifall unterbrochen, zum ersten Mal.
He made a strong case out of producing fear of Soviet-style communism, fear of such a big power in the east of Europe. We can never win that war without crushing Soviet Union, and we have to win that war, because otherwise Soviet Union would win, and that would result in a complete disaster for Germany, complete destruction of German people.
Hitler launched a war of complete annihilation on the Soviets. In the opening days of the campaign, the Nazis drove deep into Soviet territory. Writing in his diary, Goebbels was ecstatic. The divine judgment of history is being passed onto the Soviet Union. I believe the war against Moscow will prove to be our greatest coup, psychologically and perhaps even militarily as well. But ultimately, Russia's sheer size and seemingly endless supply of troops were just too much for the Nazis. The Red Army stopped Hitler's advance in the bitterly cold winter of 1942 at the city of Stalingrad. German losses were staggering.
What really fights Goebbels' propaganda, and there's nothing he could do about it, is the death of someone in your family. If you've lost a son, if you've lost a husband, if you've lost a father on the Russian front, no words from Goebbels, no propaganda message is going to counter that sense of loss.
Goebbels realized the war was going badly and tried to rally the nation. He called for total war against what he called an inferior people.
And then the irony is that
the Soviets did come, and they did defeat the Nazis, and they did conquer half of Germany.
Yes, they did. But even after they liberated all parts of the Soviet Union from Nazi occupation, at the end of 1944, afterwards by going to other countries in Eastern Europe and going to Berlin, outside the Soviet Union have been killed more than 1 million Soviet soldiers.
I mean, do we have an idea of how many Soviet citizens, soldiers and civilians, died defeating Nazi Germany?
About 27 million Soviet citizens killed during the Second World War.
27 million?
Out of a population of about 190 million people. That makes that every family had casualties.
Those numbers, that's just absolutely unbelievable.
It is understandable why the Soviet Union did not break down even with these heavy casualties. There really was no choice than to win the war against Hitler.
It was either win or face annihilation.
Yes, either or. Like all Soviet war memorials in Berlin, it is a cemetery too, for about 7,000 Soviet soldiers buried here.
Wow.
So many losses.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to understand that we're in the middle of Berlin. We're not in Russia, we're in the middle of Berlin, and we're standing in a Soviet war memorial and graveyard in Berlin.
Yes.
And that's because the Soviets conquered Berlin at the end of the war in Europe.
There was no other chance to make an end to Nazi Germany, and so they had to.
In April 1945, the Red Army arrived at the gates of Berlin with payback on its mind.
Well, the revenge aspect.
Yes. At the very end in Berlin, there was heavy fighting up to May the 2nd, 1945.
And in the Battle of Berlin, how many Soviet soldiers are estimated to have been killed?
About 80,000, that is the official Soviet account.
80,000?
80,000.
And how short a period are we talking here?
We are speaking about less than 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks, 80,000 Soviet soldiers dead?
Yeah.
Wow.
While the battle for Berlin raged in the streets, Joseph Goebbels, along with his wife Magda and their 6 children, took refuge with Hitler and other high-ranking Nazis in an underground bunker in the city's central district. It was there that Goebbels spent his final days, and where his story came to a horrifying conclusion.
Verstanden zu leben und so werden wir auch verstehen zu sterben. So, das hat er gesagt als faktisch letzte Worte.
In my mission to find where Joseph Goebbels ranks in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I'm looking for the Berlin site of the underground Führer bunker where he died. It's not easy to find. I'm here to meet Berlin journalist Lothar Heinke, who's going to tell me about Goebbels' final hours as the Red Army closed in on this spot.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm James.
Hello, James. Guten Tag.
Very nice to meet you.
Okay.
So I had quite a trouble finding this place because there's nothing left here of the bunker. So...
No, nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. The Soviet Red Army hat das gesprengt und dann war das beseitigt worden.
How long has that plaque been there?
Steht dort seit 2006. Und der Staat hat sich eigentlich nicht so richtig getraut, hier entweder den Bunker wieder zu öffnen und als Touristenattraktion. Das Dritte Reich hat ja die halbe Welt durcheinander gebracht und hat Millionen Tote, Teil des Systems. Nicht? Und hier war das Ende des Systems, des Nationalsozialismus.
So how did it all end here for Goebbels?
Es muss hier eine ziemlich bedrückte Stimmung in diesem Bunker gewesen sein. Es ging alles wild durcheinander. Hitler hat sich erschossen mit Eva Braun.
On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide to avoid the humiliation of being captured. Only a day earlier, the Führer had named Joseph Goebbels to be his successor as Chancellor of Germany.
Der Goebbels hat sich verabschiedet von seinen Leuten und hat, wie gesagt, dem Telefonisten die Hand gegeben, was er nie gemacht hatte vorher, und hat ihm tief in die Augen geblickt und gesagt, wir haben verstanden zu leben und so werden wir auch verstehen zu sterben. So, das hat er gesagt als faktisch letzte Worte. Und dann ist er in sein Zimmer gegangen und hat sich mit seiner Frau vergiftet.
Joseph Goebbels and his wife were dead. German soldiers tried to burn the couple's bodies in the courtyard to keep the Soviets from using them as trophies. But the sight of Goebbels' charred remains were nothing compared to what was discovered deep inside the bunker itself.
Joseph and Magda Goebbels make the most appalling and evil decision that any parent can make, and that is to murder their children.
They couldn't imagine any purpose in living or in having their children live in a world without Adolf Hitler and without National Socialism.
For 21 years, Goebbels was devoted to Hitler and the Nazi Party. It was his life. It was his everything. In many ways, it was love, the worst kind of love, an obsessional lust for pure evil.
It could be the ultimate final sacrifice of a true zealot.
Learning about Joseph Goebbels' devotion to Hitler has been both a fascinating and disturbing experience. Now it's time for me to determine where this master of Nazi propaganda fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil.
You know, to murder your 6 children, it requires devotion that becomes evil in itself.
My journey across Berlin has given me new insight into the role Joseph Goebbels played in the Nazi regime. Now it's time for us to decide where he should be placed in the hierarchy of evil. Using our unique system of playing cards, I want to determine where Goebbels ranks in Hitler's Most Wanted. Of all the places I visited connected to Goebbels' story, the one that really struck me the most was the site of the famous May 1933 book burning. And Goebbels was there acting as this sort of master of ceremonies.
Eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende.
The thing about Goebbels is that he really believed in anti-Semitism. Some of these really senior Nazis, you know, were there. They were anti-Semites for practical reasons in order to get ahead. Goebbels, he really believed in it.
I think some people will think that because he was so anti-Semitic that suggests an elevation of evil.
Anthony, what influence do you think his message of hatred and violence had on the German masses?
When you think about Nazism, the frenzy of Nazi rallies, the emotional whipping up of support and passion, that's all down to Goebbels. And without that, you don't have this mass buy-in and this mass participation.
I think Goebbels is sometimes oversold as a master propagandist, and I'll tell you why. This is a dictatorship. How hard can it be to get your message across when you own the radio and indeed the newspapers? It's not that difficult.
I've seen how Goebbels used his propaganda tools to manipulate the German people, rousing the nation into war. But Goebbels continued to blanket them with Nazi lies long after he knew that war was lost, and millions would continue to suffer and die.
You get a sense, certainly with other Nazi figures who are very much aware that what they're doing is bad. There's always that doubt there. But with Goebbels, there never appears to be any doubt. It makes him very chilling.
Yeah, pure devotion. He's doing it, that's wrong. He's doing it anyway. Goebbels really was devoted to the cause.
But to prove his loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime, Goebbels not only kills himself, but kills all of his children. What does that say about him?
I think that does prove exceptional evil. From the perspective of a father, you know, to murder your 6 children requires devotion that becomes evil in itself.
I would see it as a genuine sense that there was no point having his children alive in a world without Nazism, without Hitler as a savior.
It's hard to imagine a more severe version of fanaticism.
It's this level of commitment to the Nazi cause that makes him one of the most dangerous of all Hitler's followers, a true believer to the very end. So what I'd like to do now is discuss where the three of you think that Goebbels would rank in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Anthony, what are your thoughts first?
The Nazi crimes weren't random, they were systematic. And as Minister of Propaganda, as the choreographer of Nazi pageantry, and as a fanatical anti-Semite, Goebbels was central to that system. Because of that, he's number 3.
Guy?
Yeah, I might take exception to you a little bit. You know, the point is, the Nazis controlled the media. How hard is it to get your message across when you do so? That makes me want to go lower than you, but reluctantly, I'm going to go for a 3 as well.
Matt?
He certainly was the master of ceremonies. He was central. This couldn't have happened without him. But I'm curious about whether he would have been able to hold the knife himself. I'm going to rate him a little lower, 4 or 5.
I'm going to disagree with you, Matt, because I think he did get his hands bloody. He did murder his own children
for the cause, and his children became victims of Nazism. Also, his role as the Minister of Propaganda. I understand where you're coming from completely, Guy, but I just feel that that message being sent out and how virulently violent it was, I think that played such an important role in the crimes of the Nazi regime. So I'm gonna have to say he ranks number 3, and that is the Ace of Diamonds.
Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels orchestrated the brainwashing of Germany to pave the way for the Holocaust and the Second World War. For that and the murder of his 6 children, he ranks 3rd in Hitler's hierarchy of evil. Hermann Göring, Adolf Hitler's second in command. Born into a distinguished family, he was charming, flamboyant, and a ruthless manipulator. Göring became addicted to wealth and power and was willing to obtain it by any means necessary.
He is a killer. He is a murderer, and he seems completely fine with that.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted.
The thing that sets Göring apart from the other sort of leaders of the Nazi regime was the fact that he was a legitimate First World War fighter ace. He hadn't just served in the front lines, but he'd actually been extremely good at what he did.
There's no doubt if the Third Reich had never happened, Göring would now be remembered as a bona fide German hero, and we wouldn't be talking about him in terms of evil.
He was a decorated, dashing man of action, and that explains his success in World War I, his adulation, and it also explains his attraction to Nazism.
I think there's sometimes a danger with Göring that we focus on this sort of larger-than-life character, but behind that lies this really nasty individual.
But he's got grandiosity combined with a glib superficial charm, conning, manipulative nature, a certain level of cruelty underlying everything. Once you put all these characteristics together, that is getting much closer to what we would consider to be a definition of psychopathy, of the psychopath.
So how did a revered fighter pilot of the First World War become a psychopathic war criminal in the Second? I've come to Germany to find out.
So what is this aircraft?
This is an Auto biplane.
I'm meeting with Joshua Fink, a curator at the Flugwerft Schleißheim Air Museum just outside Munich. I want to find out more about Göring's life as a pilot. Göring started his Air Corps flying career in a reconnaissance plane, just like this one.
How dangerous would it have been to fly one of these things then?
Well, first of all, quite dangerous because the covering is only cloth. A special cloth made and painted with a special glue. The problem is that this glue is not very long water resistant.
Okay, so it could fall apart, you mean, if it rained?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine how brave you'd have to be to actually fly one of these things. I mean, I feel I could almost put my hand through it if I pressed on this hard enough.
Göring had first enlisted in the infantry. He soon realized there was little glory in trench warfare and managed to transfer himself to the Air Corps.
You've got to remember quite how scary it was being a pilot in the First World War. You know, it was an incredibly primitive form of warfare, incredibly risky. The death rate was appallingly high on both sides.
The planes were so hard to fly that more pilots died during training than in combat. But combat itself was extremely dangerous. In essence, this was the dawn of the dogfight.
If this was in a combat situation, you'd have people shooting at you, and I could see how easily that would be for this thing to come crashing to the ground if it was hit by anything.
It has been their duty to fly and to go into combat. And on the other hand, I think that they have been brave and a little bit crazy. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely could not have done that. No.
Flying reconnaissance was very high risk, but it didn't provide the honor and adoration Göring craved.
He wanted to be seen as heroic, and distinguishing himself militarily would be, he thought, a way to garner that honor and that level of distinction.
The way to gain distinction was by killing the enemy. So Göring transferred to a fighter squadron. Even a severe hip wound didn't keep him out of action for long.
War suits some people. And Göring is one of those people who feels very at home on the battlefield or, on the battlefield in the sky. He loves showing off, he loves being brave. I think he really enjoys war. That's just part of his personality type.
What I'm looking for is an aircraft that Göring flew at the end of the war, and I understand you have one here.
It's just around here at the corner. It's a Fokker D7.
Ah, this guy.
Yep.
Near the end of World War I, aviation technology had advanced by leaps and bounds.
So this is Top Gun 1918?
Yeah, something like this.
Wow, wow, how technology's changed.
The Fokker D7 was the most advanced plane of its day, far superior to what the Allies had. But pilots still had to be superb multitaskers.
You was moving, and you had to shoot at a moving target in the air, doing a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're not only shooting in the air, you also have to handle your gas, your flaps, your wings, everything.
You're being shot at by other people, and then you've got to get within meters of a target with this aircraft to then have a chance of shooting someone down.
Yeah, that's it. And this is crazy enough for everyone.
It's crazy, but it's incredibly impressive.
First World War pilots were known as Knights of the Sky, and for good reason. They were incredibly brave, and they also had this chivalric code that respected each other. But also, they valorized and glamorized themselves.
The fact that Göring managed to shoot down 22 enemy aircraft with this type of aircraft and earlier technology, that really tells me that he must have been a legitimate war hero.
If you want to call him hero or whatever, he has been an absolutely skilled pilot.
Göring's skill and daring was officially recognized. He became one of Germany's most decorated military men. But the medal he's proudest of and always wears around his neck is pour le mérite, for merit.
It's the highest German honor you can be awarded. And anybody who's got that medal is kind of like a celebrity, a rock star, film star of their day. It shows utmost bravery.
I want to find out how Göring came to be such a heroic figure. Where did his bravado come from? I'm in Bavaria in southern Germany, on my way to his childhood home. Göring was born in 1893, and his upbringing was anything but ordinary.
I think this is it. Oh, check this place out.
This is Castle Feldenstein, believed to be almost 1,000 years old, where his family lived until 1913.
It's like a proper medieval castle. I feel like I've been transported back in time to the Middle Ages. Oh, it's just magnificent. I half expect to see an archer leering at me through one of the arrow slits, or even man-at-arms in full armor up on the battlements. Wow.
I'm meeting with historian Robert Giersch, who can tell me about Göring's time here.
What would it have been like for Hermann Göring to grow up here?
Ich denke, dass die Burg, dass die Wirkung der Burg als mittelalterliches Machtsymbol, dass ihn das fasziniert hat. Diese kühne Lage der Burg auf dem Felsen über dem Tal, das hat ihm sicher gut entsprochen.
Here, Göring played at being a soldier in battle. His family didn't actually own the castle, but from an early age, he believed he was someone special.
Göring, unlike many other senior Nazis, actually came from a distinguished background. But it was a family with a distinguished background that was maybe temporarily embarrassed. And so they often lived on the largesse of Göring's godfather, Hermann Eppenstein. Eppenstein also carried on an affair with Göring's mother.
It's likely his mother's infidelity and his father's acceptance of it influenced the rest of Göring's life.
We use our parents as models, and so that unusual familial situation could have struck him in an exceptional way. Göring had a tendency not to follow the rules very much.
What was it about this castle that Göring liked so much?
Gelände als, ja, vielleicht hat er sich als kleiner Burgherr gefühlt, war dann auch etwas Besonderes unter seinen Schulkollegen und mit seinen Mitschülern, die da unten im Tal wohnen. Das hat ihm wahrscheinlich auch einen besonderen, ja, Status verliehen.
Göring's time at Castle Feldenstein shaped his idea of what a suitable style of living was or should be for a man of his station.
I think it's absolutely fascinating that one of the most powerful Nazis grew up in a beautiful medieval castle. I mean, this thing is stunning, it's grand, it's situated in some of the most beautiful Bavarian countryside. I think being here and just seeing this thing, really, to me, it speaks volumes about Göring the man. As a boy, Göring dreamed of military glory, and he made that dream come true, becoming one of Germany's top fighter aces. But his glorious war came to a crashing halt when Germany suddenly surrendered.
Göring takes the end of the war really badly. Not only, is his favorite pastime, battle, now over, but also he, like so many other German men of his generation, regards Germany as having been stabbed in the back. He regards, the defeat as utterly unnecessary, and in fact, it's people on the home front that are responsible for the defeat and not the Allies.
Göring deeply resented the terms the victorious Allies imposed on Germany. He was looking for radical solutions, and he soon found them. I'm off to the heart of Munich. It's where Göring met Hitler and began his meteoric rise to the top of the Nazi regime. The relationship between these two supremely powerful men was one of the most destructive the world has ever known.
People were dying, and fascists as well as communists were marching with guns.
Hermann Göring was a war hero and a war criminal. I'm on a mission to find out where Göring ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. I've come to Munich, where his relationship with Adolf Hitler began.
Wow, it really is beautiful.
Like the space it offers in the middle of the city.
I'm here to meet Michael Trammer, a photojournalist who can tell me about Göring's connection to Munich's dark past. He's brought me to Königsplatz, the scene of fascist protests in the 1920s.
Why were far-right groups protesting here specifically?
This place was used for far-right rallies due to its size. They understood themselves as fighting force against leftists.
After World War I, Germany was economically devastated. Extremists on both the left and right were seeking radical solutions.
In Munich, you have an attempt to set up a communist state on the Soviet model. And of course, that provokes an amazing backlash from people who are opposed to that form of government and society.
It's another level of violence. You actually have guns being fired, people being killed for their political beliefs.
For sure, I mean, those were armed fights. People were dying, and fascists as well as communists were marching with guns.
It's here that Göring saw Hitler speak.
It must have just been this incredibly powerful moment for someone like Göring that was interested in that type of politics.
As far as we know, he just encountered Hitler in the crowd, and it must have been a stunning moment for him.
So this is where it all began for Göring and Hitler.
This place was the scene of a turning point in history. Göring later said of Hitler, God gave the savior to the German people.
Göring finds Hitler attractive because he is a brilliant orator, he clearly, is a man with zeal on a mission, and he seems to have the answers to all of Germany's problems, all encapsulated in this one very dynamic, charismatic personality. Göring, despite being a big personality himself, is completely sucked in and seduced by it.
Like many war veterans, Göring was radicalized.
We have much to learn about the individual characteristics that lead to radicalization. There is some evidence to suggest that low empathy, high impulsivity, low intellectual resources may contribute to some extent. The individual often has trouble fitting in, is trying to find their own identity.
Today, radicalism is on the march again in Germany. So I know you're a photojournalist and you cover the far right. Do members of the far right today, or neo-Nazis, congregate here still?
Yes, this is still a place of gathering because of the historical link. I can actually show you a photo from a rally in 2015. You have the group marching in the middle with their Pegida against the Islamization of the Western world banner.
Oh my goodness. Pegida mobilizes through social media. It's drawn crowds of 25,000. One of its leaders once affected a Hitler mustache and haircut. They understand the history. They understand the significance of this place to the Nazis. So there's that connection between then and now, that they do the same sorts of things.
It should be in people's mind when they see a picture of Pegida marching down this road, that this is the exact spot where fascists gathered before they took their power.
Covering the demonstrations of the extreme right can be a dangerous business.
I have been attacked. Just down the road at Karolinenplatz, for example, I was kicked once.
So it sounds like intimidation is a major tactic they use.
Well, yeah, it is intimidation. I mean, one of their chants is Lügenpresse, which means lying press, accusing the press of spreading fake news about fascist movements. And it is intimidating if you have hundreds or thousands of people targeting you directly as a journalist.
That must be really scary.
Being aware that it can be dangerous and that you are seen as one of their enemies is important, but I'm not scared doing my job. I think it would be the wrong thing to be scared. That would be giving in for them.
Pegida is a far-right group determined to claim Germany for Germans only, not unlike Hitler's followers before them. Back in the 1920s, those followers, like Göring, would seek out Hitler at one of his favorite haunts.
And here we have the Haus Neumeier.
Ah, so this is the place?
Yeah.
Dankeschön.
Danke.
That's good. Buon appetito.
Guten Appetit. We're eating pizza and sitting here talking just a few meters away from the place where Hitler and Göring met for the first time.
It's really surreal for me to be at the place where quite possibly one of the most destructive partnerships in history started, and now it's this modest pizzeria. After getting to know Hitler, Göring committed himself to the Nazi cause, and Hitler immediately took him in to his inner circle.
Göring was important to Hitler in the early days of the Nazi movement because there were certain members of the aristocratic and conservative establishment in Germany who had a lot of disdain for Nazism, but they saw Göring as a Nazi that they could respect and that they could work with.
In the battleground that was Munich in the 1920s, the Nazis relied on an organization called the SA.
The SA was the Sturmabteilung, or the Storm Division, and this was the paramilitary organization of the Nazi Party.
Göring's first assignment from Hitler was to instill military discipline in this gang of thugs. In 1923, he and Hitler, backed by the newly trained SA, tried to take over the Bavarian government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch.
It degenerates into a fiasco. There's no real proper command and control. People don't really know who's leading it. And it's Göring who really, tries to rouse these people to keep going forward. He is a real leader of men at this stage, and he's proving himself to be very good at it.
I've come to the place where Hitler and Göring's attempted coup met its violent end. So this is the Feldherrnhalle?
Yeah, this is the Feldherrnhalle, Field Marshal's Hall at Munich Odeonsplatz.
So what happened here then?
Well, in 1923, Hitler and 2,000 men marched towards the War Ministry that is down the road.
Right.
And they were crushed and stopped by Munich police. There was a shootout. 15 of the Nazis were killed. Göring was wounded here with a shot in the leg, and he was carried away by comrades to get him out of battle. And Hitler, after that, was convicted to jail.
Sustaining an injury for the cause put Göring very high in Hitler's esteem. But after the failure of the coup, Göring fled to Sweden.
He'd been given morphine for the pain from his wounds and became addicted.
In addition to his morphine addiction, there are questions about Göring's mental state in those years. He was committed to a Swedish institution, he said, as for treatment for his morphine addiction, but it's possible that he was there for mental health reasons.
Göring was so violent he had to be confined in a straitjacket. But he managed to kick his addiction, temporarily. Hermann Göring was in exile for 4 years. When he finally returned, he inaugurated the Nazi reign of terror. It began in Berlin, and that's where I'm headed.
Here they tortured political opponents. It still causes me shivers.
In the 1930s, Hermann Göring was a rising star in the Nazi Party. I've come to Berlin on my mission to find out where he ranks in their hierarchy of evil.
So where are you taking me?
So James, we are now looking at the foundation of the headquarters of the Gestapo.
I'm meeting with historian Stephanie Fischer to find out how Göring used the feared secret police, the Gestapo, to climb to the peak of power.
Well, this part of the building was used as a prison for the Gestapo during the Nazi years.
I know that Göring established the Gestapo in 1933. What exactly was it, and why did he create it?
Well, the Gestapo became an important tool for the Nazis to destroy its political opponents. They used violence against anybody they felt were their enemies. And the people who were in this prison, they experienced tremendous violence.
Yeah.
The seeds of the Gestapo were sown in 1933, when Germany's parliament, or Reichstag, was set on fire.
Göring was absolutely thrilled the night the Reichstag burned down. Even when it was happening, he turned up, watched the flames, and he knew that this was representing a massive open door for Hitler to, walk through and to take fundamental, total power. He loved it.
Just 2 months after the Reichstag fire, Göring created the Gestapo.
The Gestapo was trying to rout out anybody who was perceived to be an enemy of Nazism, who represented a threat to the Third Reich. It was a police force that was there to make sure that people, behaved as the Nazis wanted them to behave.
It's terrifying to be standing in this space and knowing that there were maybe thousands of people who were detained here, and they would have been brutally interrogated. I understand that people would have been tortured in this building when it existed.
It still causes me shivers today to be in a side of Nazi terror, right? And it just makes me aware of the fact that we should not take democracy for granted. Part of why the Gestapo was established, it was one of the important tools for a Nazi to destroy its own democracy.
Göring was said to have told his Gestapo, shoot first and inquire afterwards. And if you make mistakes, I will protect you. The rules of civilized behavior meant nothing to him. It's a 6-hour drive south from Berlin to the resort town of Bad Wiessee. I'm headed to an old hotel that was ground zero for an infamous killing spree. It turns out that among the first victims of the Nazi reign of terror were other Nazis, the SA or stormtroopers.
It's quite eerie being outside this abandoned hotel. It has such a dark history, but it's located in such a beautiful area.
Tourists are drawn here by its famous spa, the beautiful lake nestled into the Alps, and its peaceful atmosphere. But on a June night in 1934, this place was anything but peaceful. It came to be known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was set in motion by Hitler himself, with Göring's enthusiastic help.
The Night of the Long Knives was a way to purge their rivals within the party and the movement. They thought that the SA had gotten too independent, too big for its britches, and could actually be a rival power base within the Nazi state and a rival power base to Hitler himself.
The SA was led by Ernst Röhm, one of Göring's early mentors in the Nazi Party.
Göring fundamentally betrays Ernst Röhm. He's enough of a pragmatist to know, if he's not going to be liked by Hitler, I'm going to help Hitler get rid of him. It's the ultimate betrayal.
So it really pointed to his ruthlessness and his willingness to do anything to consolidate his power.
The Night of the Long Knives was a murder plot. Be in no doubt about that. You know, this is a plot that sees Hitler drive through the night to a spa town where various members of the SA are staying. You know, he enters into the hotel. It's, you know, they're brandishing weapons, they're brandishing guns.
Röhm and other senior officers were taken away to prison and shot. Today, the Hotel Lederer is slated for demolition. Destroying it would obliterate its terrible history. But how do the people who visit here feel about it?
What do you know about this place?
Ein bisschen. Ja, ich weiß, dass hier diese SA-Leute erschossen worden sind, damals von der SS. Ja, da gab es Streit um die Führung und die Richtung und Hitler wollte dadurch durch dieses Killing hier die Führungseliten der SA auslöschen.
This place is cited to be demolished. Based on what happened here, do you think it should be preserved?
Aber wer will hier wohnen? Hier will ja kein Mensch wohnen, ne? In so einem Haus mit so einer Vergangenheit.
After the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler moved more firmly toward his ultimate goals: the annihilation of Jews and the Germanization of Europe. I'm headed back to Berlin. I want to find out how Göring helped Hitler achieve his terrible aims.
He is a killer. He is a murderer. And he seems completely fine with that.
I'm in Berlin on my mission to find out where Hermann Göring stands in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. One of the most imposing buildings in Germany, the former headquarters of the Luftwaffe, is a monument of sorts to Göring. To find out more about it, I'm meeting with historian Nick Jackson.
This is the Air Transport Ministry. So if there was a seat of Göring's power...
This would have been it?
This would have been it. In 1936, Göring had the whole block demolished and built what was Europe's largest office. There are 2,300 offices in here. The head of the Luftwaffe, that would have been something that he would have been hugely proud of, very involved in. You know, he rebuilds the Luftwaffe from scratch to this fighting force ready to go in 1939.
By the time war broke out, Göring had created the best air force in the world. The Luftwaffe planes could fly faster, climb faster, and accelerate faster than most of the aircraft they were up against. Many Allied pilots never saw their attacker coming.
It was essentially Göring's big dream. You know, he was a pilot. He loved planes. So the idea he now had his own pet air force, well, that's the best toy a man like Göring could possibly have.
He's a busy man. You think of all the titles that he had. But he certainly would have spent time in this building. In fact, that would have been the main office.
Oh, that right there, those windows?
With the large windows.
All those windows are one room, and that was his office.
That's the main office of the for the building.
He definitely had an office to match his ego.
Other than Hitler, he's the most powerful man in the country.
Throughout the 1930s, as Göring's power increased, so did his taste for the good life. He was developing a hearty appetite for all of life's pleasures.
This looks like a good place.
Yeah, let's go here.
Nick is taking me for a Göring-style meal, where I hope to find out more about Göring's character and how he helped Hitler achieve the Germanization of Europe.
It's funny, when I think of Göring, I think of this fat buffoon dressed in an absolutely ridiculous uniform and indulging in excessive opulence. He was clearly a man of many appetites.
Definitely. I mean, you can see by the size of the man that he was a keen eater. I think that would have been something that was very important in Göring's life.
If Göring was sitting here with us now, what would that be like?
I think he'd be doing most of the talking, and he would have eaten all the food. He's a very dominating character. I mean, it's all about Hermann. He wanted the attention.
Yeah.
You know, sort of standing on top of the mountain, higher than everybody else, and everyone would look and think, that is a great man.
He takes vanity to a whole new level.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's probably fair to say that in every aspect of his life, he was extravagant and boastful and completely over the top. But also perhaps the most likable of the Nazis. But always in the background, you've got that cold murderer, a man who is deeply involved with horrendous Nazi crimes.
The crimes against Jews are the most well-known Nazi atrocities. They began in the 1930s, when persecution of the Jews was official Nazi policy. Before the Holocaust, there was Kristallnacht.
Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, was A night of coordinated violence against Jewish property and Jewish people throughout Germany and Austria. Synagogues set on fire, stores looted, and people rounded up and sent to concentration camps.
Göring, with his boundless greed, did not actually approve of the destruction of property.
In fact, with Kristallnacht, he would have preferred killing more Jews, but preserving some of the valuable items and objects and buildings.
He actually told the Jews that they should pay for the damage themselves. I mean, that shows you quite how revolting a specimen he was.
Kristallnacht was only the beginning. Göring was responsible for the order to organize the practical details of the Holocaust.
In 1941, Göring signed a memo authorizing the coordination of the so-called final solution to the Jewish question, the systematic extermination of Jews. Göring's memo authorizing the coordination of mass extermination is a huge step of the development of Nazi policy from persecution to genocide.
The Holocaust has many fathers, but Göring is one of the most significant of all these figures. What's so sort of especially hateful about Göring is that he's not a kind of virulent anti-Semite at heart. He's carrying out anti-Semitic policies in order to advance his own political career.
The fact that he would be willing to be a part of these atrocities simply for personal gain is truly terrifying.
I feel you could be almost disarmed by Göring's eccentricity, that he's this larger-than-life character, he's involved in all these ridiculous excesses, but he was an evil man.
He is a killer. He is a murderer, and he seems completely fine with that.
Göring's willingness to do anything for Hitler made him indispensable. But in 1939, Hitler revealed that he planned to invade Poland, and Göring tried to talk him out of it.
Why was he so against Germany starting the Second World War?
If Germany loses, he loses all of the power, the houses, the uniforms, the glory, the medals, the position that he'd worked so hard and so ruthlessly to achieve. The most important thing for Hermann Göring was Hermann Göring.
Hitler ignored Göring's views and declared war, but named Göring as his eventual successor and Marshal of the Empire. It was the latest in a long list of titles Göring accumulated. He collected them like others might collect autographs. The more, the better. Göring was at the height of his powers, but could he keep his lofty position? That's what I want to find out next. I'm 70 kilometers north of Berlin, inside one of Europe's largest nature reserves. It used to be the site of Karenhall, Hermann Göring's vast country estate.
What's this? This here?
What's a stone? You found a lot of this.
So this is an original piece of the building?
It's original.
So what is this? Do you know, like from the
wall.
house? It's part of the wall?
It's the wall, yeah.
Wow.
I'm meeting with Volker Knopf, historian and an authority on Karenhall. He can tell me how important this place was to Göring during World War II.
That was Karenhall here.
Uh-huh.
Around here was a guardhouse, and the same on this side. And here where the trees are, if you look on the trees, and you see the walls of the house.
So the main building was right here?
Ja, soweit das Auge reicht.
So it's been completely engulfed
Sehr groß.
by the forest.
Ja, aber damals war hier ein Park, ein großer Park, keine Bäume oder nur wenige Bäume.
There's little evidence any buildings were ever here. Just a few tunnels remain.
Alle Häuser waren verbunden durch solche Gänge.
So this was a passage between two buildings to move supplies.
Ja, ja. Und in dieses Loch kann ich gefahrlos mit Ihnen runtergehen. Es wird.
You can step in that.
Me, I know it. For you.
Oh, wow, look at that. There's no way I'm going in there.
Karenhall, named after Göring's deceased wife Karen, began as a simple hunting lodge. By 1937, after years of renovations, it was a palatial complex. It had everything Göring could want, including a massive library, ballroom, swimming pool, even a private zoo. Göring wanted the estate to be known as a shrine to Karin. In reality, it was a shrine to himself.
This is a playground fit for what he regards himself almost like now a prince. So this is his own sort of palace, and it fits his ego.
Komm, ja, mein Cäsar. Kommst du mich besuchen?
Karin Hall recreated the conditions of the good life and of the style of living befitting a man of his station that he'd learned at Castle Feldenstein in his youth. He held parties there, he entertained foreign dignitaries there. It was really where he lived an extravagant, opulent life.
Karin Hall was crammed with art masterpieces, looted from occupied Europe, one of the grandest private collections in the world. It was also his unofficial office, where his staff would come from Berlin to get their orders.
What do you think about Göring?
War das joviale Gesicht des Nationalsozialismus. Aber konnte heute oder in dieser Minute die Wange seines Kindes und eine halbe Stunde später konnte ein Todesurteil unterzeichnen. Das war Göring. Hatte viele Gesichter.
The beginning of World War II was good for Göring. The Nazis scored victory after victory with his Luftwaffe leading the charge. Then came setbacks.
It was Göring's job to destroy the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force, in order to make way for the German invasion barges and then the overall invasion of the British Isles. Now, this never happened because the Luftwaffe failed at their job and the RAF managed to outwit Göring. It was a terrible failure for him.
Göring had solemnly promised Hitler no bombs would ever fall on Germany.
The other big failure of Göring and his Luftwaffe is the fact that the RAF managed to bomb the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. Göring, one of his old fighters, has now failed him twice. This actually is the beginning of Göring's slide into, nothingness in the Nazi regime.
Göring was increasingly isolated from the inner circle and increasingly retreated to Karin Hall and to his life of pleasure and opulence.
Hat in seinen Memoiren geschrieben, wenn man Karin Hall betrat, hatte man das Gefühl, als herrsche tiefster Frieden. Hat hier gelebt, als wäre ihn herum kein Krieg.
Göring was still trotted out on ceremonial occasions, but even that rankled his Nazi colleagues. Joseph Goebbels wrote, "Bemedaled fools and vain perfumed fops have no place in our war leadership. It's effeminate behavior given the current situation."
Towards the end of the war, as the Reich starts falling apart, well, so does Göring. And he retreats into his own sort of kind of make-believe world, stuffed with looted and plundered art, complete with all sorts of baubles, a chest full of medals. I mean, he cuts an absurd figure. And also, he's hopelessly addicted to drugs. Essentially, what you've got is a fat, drug-addled, dipsomaniac, who has lost any respect.
But Göring still harbored delusions of grandeur.
Towards the end of the war, Göring sent a message to Hitler where he essentially said, if I don't hear from you by a certain time, I'll assume you're unable to fulfill the duties of Führer, and I'll take over control and command of the Reich. Hitler regarded this as an extreme act of betrayal, and it was really the final nail in the coffin in terms of Hitler's relationship with Göring.
As the Russian army approached, Göring moved his plundered possessions to safety and fled, ordering Karin Hall to be destroyed.
Göring resigned to the Americans and expected to be treated as the representative of a defeated power. Instead, he was arrested for war crimes.
One of the things I find most interesting about Göring is when he was finally captured, he supposedly believed that he deserved a parade rather than to be convicted. One possibility is that his increased drug use had led to just increasingly delusional thought processes.
Göring is sentenced to death, and he knows he's going to be hanged. But actually, he's still got one more card up his sleeve, and he plays it actually very well. He's got a suicide pill. His body is discovered when a guard looks through the hatch in his cell, and there is Göring's dead form. His face is set in a kind of horrible rictus grin, as if he's having the last laugh.
My trip to Hall has given me the last piece of the puzzle that is Hermann Göring. Now it's time for me to finally determine where this complicated character fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil.
He murdered and plundered his way across Europe, and he murdered and plundered his own people.
My visit to Germany has helped inform my understanding of Hermann Göring's position in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. Now it's time for us to decide where he should be placed in our unique pack of cards. The same kind of pack that law enforcers use today to identify their most dangerous killers. This is Hitler's Most Wanted.
Guy, what's your impression of Göring as a person?
Frankly, I find it a little hard not to be seduced by him. I think he has an enormous amount of charm.
And that's what makes that personality so dangerous, is the fact that he can charm you, he can trick you, he can pull one over on you, and he can send you to a concentration camp.
Göring used charm to mask his brutality. He saw himself as a dashing man of action and a subtle diplomat who could turn every situation to his advantage.
One location to me that really exemplified his personality was Hall, which at the time was this incredibly opulent pleasure palace. Anthony, why was Göring so obsessed with opulence?
Göring had a very particular idea of appropriate living for a man of his station. The idea was formed in his youth, living at Castle Feldenstein, and he tried to realize it in Hall.
I think that's absolutely right. He was a big personality, and he had very, very greedy tastes. You know, he liked his food, he liked his drink, he liked his morphine, and he liked his works of art. So, in many ways, he was like this big monster that just needed to suck in as much stuff as he could, and it never ended.
What was his motivation?
I think, in absolutely succinct terms, he was a thief. When he got a chance to aggrandize himself and enrich himself, he took it.
Göring killed innocent people to maintain power and the wealth and luxury that came with it. He was ruthlessly ambitious, undermining rivals on his climb to the top.
I think there's sometimes a danger with Göring that we focus on this sort of larger-than-life character, but behind that lies this really nasty individual.
Immediately after Kristallnacht, Göring sets to work coming up with ordinances to dispossess Jews, strip them of money and of assets. So we really see that nasty scheming in the service of Nazi anti-Semitism right in that example.
For Göring, anti-Semitism was a practicality. He wasn't actually, I don't think, a convinced anti-Semite.
To some extent, that makes you wonder, it makes me wonder, why is he doing the things he's doing? He's doing them for personal gain. He really is using the atrocities as a tool. To some extent, that, to me, suggests a greater evil.
So what I'd like to do now is figure out where Göring ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Matt, if you want to go first.
Well, I think psychologically he's up there. I give him a 4.
Anthony?
He was central to the early rise of the Nazi Party. He was central to remilitarization. He was central to the early successes in the war. Add to all of that his direct responsibility for the so-called final solution, and we have to rank him at number 4.
Guy?
I'll put him at 4 as well, because he murdered and plundered his way across Europe, and he murdered and plundered his own people.
So you guys have a unanimous consensus, and based on my experience exploring his story in Germany and our discussion here, I'm going to agree. He is number 4. He is the ace of clubs.
Fourth in the Nazi hierarchy of evil, Hermann Göring had a hand in almost all of that regime's crimes. He bears enormous responsibility for the horrors that befell millions of innocents.